This is The Long Way to the Game, only on Megaphone Rugby.
Welcome back to the second episode of the second series, The Long Way to the Game. It's quite a mouthful, Paul. I think you've got the longest podcast name in rugby on YouTube ever. But anyway, thanks. Welcome back.
Yes, I think we should just call it Chasing the Box, MVO, or something like that.
But I mean,
yes, thank you very much.
If we could say Chasing the Box, we have a very small target audience. If we say Chasing the Bulls, I think it might be more convenient, don't you think? More apt. Anyway, we're going to talk about the fan experience. Last week we talked about, I don't want to call it misguided, but let's call it misguided attempts by World Rugby and other people in high places trying to fix a game that's not broken. And while they're trying to fix it, they're trying to fix the obvious things. So I'm going to put the link to our first episode up here so you can go have a look for yourself. Trying to fix the scrum, it's not a problem. And we saw this weekend again how exciting rugby can be if it's done properly. We noticed that the refs probably have got a bit of instruction not to be too overly pedantic. Things are being not as vigorously refereed as they used to be, and that's good for the game. Scrums are good. I mean, wherever have you seen an Irish prop flying mid-air from an Italian scrum of all things? But anyway, those are psychological scars. So this week we're going to be talking about the fan experience. And I've got a bugbear with fan experience, as you know, and I'll start with, the one that bothers me the most. And my friend Johan Jordan is quite adamant that I'm smoking my socks here. And that is, for example, Sweet Caroline. The fan experience, people want to have an experience when they go to a stadium. They want to have a beer, they want to have entertainment. They can just well go to the movies if people ever go to the movies still, but it's got to be a package deal, and I suppose Sweet Caroline is part of that for me. But when you talk about fan experience, that's a bit of a limited definition, I suppose. What would you describe fan experience as before we start talking about what it is and what it isn't in terms of what the unions are delivering?
Yeah, I think Envia, and I am really passionate about it. I think in your channel, this is the one thing that I feel like I'm a real expert on. I can't compete with Andre Pretorius and Harry and you when we're analyzing the game. But I feel like in the last year, at least with the Springboks, I've most likely been to more games than anyone else. And I go as a real fan. I don't sit in the suites. I don't get my tickets from the rugby union. I don't sit in the press box. I buy them. I drive to the stadium or I take an Uber. I stand in line. I have to go to the bathrooms where the lines are long. And so I have that complete fan experience. So I would say, first of all, I think we have to think of it holistically, as the fan experience actually has three parts. There's a game day fan experience. If I'm going to the game, what does it feel like before the game, getting to the game, in the game, after the game? Then there's the television fan experience. That's really important because the vast majority of fans actually don't experience it in the stadium. They experience it on the TV. And those things can actually compete with one another. When we talk about like Baltimore, for example, there's competing needs there, the TV audience and the home audience. And then the third thing for me, which is in a weird way how you and I met, is the between the games experience. It's the internet experience. It's the podcasts and the social media, and how do we stay engaged and informed? And so for me, the fan experience is all of those, and you can look into each of them differently. There are different aspects of them that are today good or bad or struggling for survival, etc. And I think maybe we can kind of you can pick how we go at it. But that for me is the end-to-end fan experience, is all those things. At a game, on TV, and between games, how do I stay connected to the team, the players, the fans, the social media, everything?
Well, you talked about the Uber, and you sent me some pictures of you traveled to Houston this past weekend, of your Ubers. The one was a boat, the other one was a tuk-tuk. I mean, that's quite an experience, you're living on an island.
I would just say when I get to a game, you have to know I really want to be there because it's really tough to go. So if you take like the games at Ellis Park as an example, my fan experience is quite stressful. I have to start on the island on the boat, and then a tuk-tuk, and then one flight, little Cessna, then a big flight, then Houston, then to Johannesburg, then risk my life getting to Ellis Park, trying to find parking, hoping my car will be there when I'm back, then in the stadium, then back. So I think, yes, that is the whole experience. So I feel like we've gotten to the part of your channel where I have something to contribute that's unique.
No,
is that I go to a lot of games. and I don't get any perks or special treatment when I go to those games. So I see it like a normal fan would.
Well, let's start with that. The fact that you're able to go to a lot of the games are, due to the fact that you've lived in America and everything else. But that's a a big part of the problem. People can't go to games anymore because it's simply become too expensive. And a big part of where the a love for rugby or love for any sport for that matter starts is when you take your child, your kid, your son, your girl, your daughter there. They experience the game, they experience the atmosphere, and they experience the players running into the field and everything else. But nowadays, you can't afford to take the whole family anymore. That's where it starts for me. Before we even get to the game or the TV or the in between game experience, has rugby not got too expensive? I mean, you said yourself, those tests last year, Barbarians in Georgia and Italy. How many open spots were in those stands simply because they were too expensive?
I agree with you, Envy, and that really is sad for me as a fan. And yes, I acknowledge that I am fortunate that for the most part, I can afford to buy the tickets. I often don't get to buy them on the primary market where they're already too expensive, but I often have to buy them on a secondary market where they're marked up 2 or 3 or 4 times, for example. And it breaks my heart that there are people that love rugby, that live close to stadiums, that simply cannot get to the stadium. And I understand that rugby is a business, and I understand that rugby is actually struggling financially. Clubs are going under. But I think there can be a vicious cycle when the financial people and the accountants make more and more decisions and optimize to make the spreadsheet look better, that they pick off the fans and disenfranchise the fans that are actually their lifeblood. And so if you look at it, on our last episode, someone wrote in the comments, the way my daughter now loves rugby is because I took her to DHL Stadium for a Stormers. I think it was a Stormers Bulls game.
And he's a Bull, and now she's a Stormer. Yeah.
I was just going to say the Stormers most likely won easily, and now his daughter is a Stormers fan for life and is fully absorbed. He says before it, she watched rugby on the TV with me, but after like the anthems and the games got going, she'd get distracted and go and do other things and then maybe come in. But once she went to the stadium, she was hooked. And that's how I know it's like a different century. It's literally a different century. But my dad took me to the old Newlands. And I first went, it wasn't even Western Province. It was club games. It was like Matis Tin Ikes or Villagers against someone. And that experience, it was still like a standing room stadium. You would stand. That was like the cheap seats. That made me like rugby. And then I started watching rugby on the television with actually listening on the radio and then watching. And then later on, and the reason I'm so obsessed with rugby and the Springboks right now is I went to that World Cup in France and I was in the stadium. Right now I have goosebumps again, like in that game, Springboks against France in the quarterfinal. And my son, we flew him over for the final, and he grew up in America for the most time. He'd never been to like a rugby game before. And he is hooked on rugby from being there at the final. And the fact that everyday fans can't afford it is at least painful for me. I can understand that if you're a business person, you optimize, Springboks are hot, sell the tickets for as much. But what really annoys me is that they decided it's better to double the price of the tickets almost year over year, and they'd accept the stadium being 90% full or 87% full. And I just feel like I would rather have made the ticket so that the whole stadium was sold out and that some people that now cannot see it could have made it to the game. And the atmosphere of a game is different when it's sold out versus 90% full. Or like, last year I told you the Wales game was maybe 70% full. The atmosphere is just not the same. And so it's both for me a kick in the face for your loyal fans, but it affects what it feels like. And long term, that can have an effect. If you're too arrogant and just say, hey, my team is so hot right now, I can charge whatever I want and people will pay it. At some point, your team won't be that hot. and the fans will not forget that. And then the last thing I'd say on that, MBA, it's a really almost like I don't know, a social commentary. I've read a lot that the Irish people are saying that they feel the atmosphere in the Aviva is not what it was in the past, and it's still sold out, but that it has to do with that the ticket prices are so high, and so the people that are going are different than the typical original Irish fan. And what they mean is, I'm just going to use the term blue collar. I don't know if the term blue collar, like in South Africa, in the US, it's a very established term to mean the working class, the everyday people on the street. That's the core of rugby fans. Rugby, I know in England, it's the elite schools and everything. But because it's now the people with the most money and corporate suites and all of that, the atmosphere is different because those people don't have the same energy. They're more reserved. They're there with their suits and ties, and I feel we're losing or risk losing that by pricing us out of let's call it the general blue collar fan, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, but there's more to it than that. Everybody wants to see the Springboks, so you can probably charge what you want to and get away with it to a degree. But I mean, at Loftus, for example, often they would price tickets very, very low to kind of entice people to come watch the game. And we spoke to Marco Massotti the other day, the owner of the Sharks, let's call him that. And he said the stadium income is negligible in the bigger scheme of things. And even with those lower ticket prices, the stadium would still be pretty much empty. When you get there, there will be your 10 or 15,000 maybe die-hard fans, but it will never be a sold out, even with the lower prices. It's not just about the prices being exorbitant. It's the fact that, there's a saying in Afrikaans, and I'm going to translate it directly to English. I can't think of the English version. It's don't kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. Maybe that is the English one. I don't know. My English is not so out today. But the point is, I think that we might have we might have been killing that golden goose as it is. Maybe by, putting it off, maybe by making the experience not as good as it should be on the game day. We'll talk about that just now. And then longer term, that's going to be the bigger problem. Yes, you can hike the prices as much as you want to, but if nobody comes to watch it, you're going to have a full stadium with exorbitant prices, or you're going to have a full stadium with low prices. The fact is you have to protect the interest in the game. People must still want to come to watch the games. And that, I think, especially on lower levels, URC, Currie Cup, lower down, that's becoming a problem. That the interest in the game, if it's not a Springbok thing, might be dying down a bit.
I think so, but it's unfortunately sort of a downward spiral that accelerates if you don't make the experience worthwhile going to. Yeah. Because let me give you an example. If you go to a game that is sold out, think of like the derbies between the Bulls and the Stormers. Even if it's not a great game, the atmosphere in that stadium and those games are such that you leave there with like you've had an emotional experience. It doesn't matter if the score was 60-40 or 9-3. It's how much tension was there, how much singing was there, how much Mexican waves was there. It's not about, I agree with you, Sweet Caroline. But then when you leave that game, you feel kind of hooked. You want to have that kind of adrenaline, that dopamine rush again. Now, if you went to that same game and if there were 15,000 spectators there, and it's just like, meh, it's like there's no energy in the stadium. The crowd are scattered across that 55,000 seat stadium. So there's nothing. It could be the exact same game, and you'll be inclined to think, yeah, that wasn't such a great use of my time and my dollars. And then secondly, the rugby administrators think that the ticket prices are the only thing that it costs me to go to the game. I have to have transport to the game. I have to find parking. I have to buy the ticket. Then I have to buy the concession food, which sometimes is just outrageous. And then I have to get back home. And so think of a family of four. Like I feel like it's a great family outing. So think of a family of four, and you add that all up, and you say, hey, that is suddenly way more than most families have as disposable income. And I just think people think of it, well, it's just the ticket price. It's not. It's the whole experience that you have to pay for. And I just think it's shifted. And then when you go to the game, these URC games on television, if I watch them on television, I would never decide to go to any of those games. At Ellis Park, as an example. Why? First of all, I've been to Ellis Park multiple times for Springbok games. The experience of getting to Ellis Park and finding parking and whatever is not great. Let's just be clear. Like, it's not an area of town where you would just generally go with your family, and it's hard to find parking. And if you do find parking, you're worried about what will happen. If it's at night, you're worried about safety when you get out of the stadium. But then you go into that huge stadium and you watch on television, and it looks, I'd rather go to a schoolboy rugby game, Envia, because there are 10,000 fans in a stadium of 60,000 fans. It looks a little bit, I don't know if it's the right word, it looks a little bit palukarig. It doesn't look like a high-end experience that I want to be part of. So I'll just watch it on television. But even on television, the experience is just naturally a little bit boring for me. I look at the screen, and it doesn't look like something that's worthy of me spending the next 80 minutes glued to it.
Yeah.
And that has a snowball effect. Like, if people watch that on TV and then they go, well, that's definitely not worth it to go to the game, or they go to the game and then they go, it was a lot of money and a lot of hassle. Then they tell their friends it wasn't good. And then that's what happens, how things kind of get out of control. And then it's hard to build it back.
Yeah, the argument's being made for smaller stadiums. We've heard it a lot. I mean, overseas, the stadiums are mostly smaller, or there's an annex almost to the main stadium. For example, in Edinburgh, they've got the Hive next
Edinburgh.
to it, and the likes. There are smaller stadiums available, and it looks better, and I suppose it is better. But then you have two stadiums to maintain. You're incurring extra costs, I suppose. But an interesting thing for me is Stormers games are typically pretty much close to sold out. Not always, but I mean, they have better crowds coming to the games than they do, for example, in Pretoria or Joburg. Durban is another place that draws quite good crowds because they've been spending time on the day experience. You know, the brides outside and the entertainment, I suppose. Harry gets a bit upset because he says, those people don't understand rugby. But the point is they're having fun and they're coming to the stadium and they're paying for it. So isn't it maybe a problem of what's going wrong at, for example, Ellis Park? Not just the fact where it's located, but what they're offering there, or at Loftus for that matter.
I think, MV, I think it's a mixture of both. I think it is the location and the setup for the game. I was going to bring that up. I love the fact that in Europe they play in these smaller stadiums, so it's a full house. On one of our episodes last season, I was in Wrexham, remember, watching a football game. At the time that I was there, the capacity of their stadium is 10,000 because they're rebuilding one stand. But it was packed, so 10,000 fans, it was packed. The fans were fully engaged. It was a soccer game. I know you'd think soccer is incredibly boring. The end score was 1-0. But my wife and I left feeling like we had a great time. The fans were raucous throughout the game. They're singing and cheering, and it's packed. And it was easy to walk there. The tickets were not outrageously expensive. Now, imagine you had played that game at Wembley, and the 10,000 fans you put into a stadium that houses 80,000. It would not have felt anything like that. So my first thing is, I'm just going to be kind of blunt. People can fight back. I think Ellis Park is a horrible stadium, and we shouldn't even play Springbok rugby there. We need to find a different stadium to play. I've never been at the F&B Stadium. For this All Black tour coming up, I'm going to go there, so I'm really looking forward to that. But if you're going to play a game where you think you're going to have 15,000 to 20,000 fans, pick a different stadium. Play at one of the university stadiums. There must be some other stadium. I know we don't have, like in Scotland, where you have the Hive right next to the Edinburgh Stadium, but you could pick smaller stadiums and play the games there. That would be the first thing I did. Then secondly, at least for television, I'd say I take a leaf out of it, American broadcasters' things. especially in college basketball. There are many basketball colleges that they play to sold out games every game. But then there are many mid-tier where they don't. And where my son played D1 basketball, one of the games was going to be televised on ESPN. Normally, they would play to about 5,000 fans. For this game, they got maybe 15,000 fans, but still the stadium was only half full. But what ESPN did, they blocked off all the upper decks with black cloth. So they packed everyone into a smaller part of the stadium, and they narrowed their camera angles that they used on the game. And so if you watched it on television, it looked exactly like a game of a top tier basketball school that was sold out. You didn't see that, like look at the view that you get at Ellis Park and Loftus and DHL Stadium. And part of it is at like Loftus especially, the cameras are looking from the main stand to the other stand. I don't know what it's called.
Eastern stand.
Yes. Most of the fans are sitting on the main stand. It's not full, but they're most there. But the cameras show you the other side of the field, which is the most empty. So that's the worst. So if you wanted to learn from American television and you're going to play the game in the big stadium, I would do at least two things. Switch the cameras to the other stand and let them show the main stand, because the main stand is more full. But I would go further. I would block off the whole upper section of Loftus and sell all the tickets in the lower section and try to fill up like the lower section as much as you can. So that seems like marketing. It is marketing. But what I tell you is the experience for the fan in the stadium will be different. It will be better. And for someone watching on TV, it will look more exciting and feel more exciting and make it more likely that they will go to the game. Those are not complex things to do. You don't have to refit the whole stadium or make a big thing. So if you can't play in a smaller stadium, and I don't know, MV, I don't know enough about South African rugby. What are the stadiums like for the universities and stuff like that? For Marty's and Ike's and Wits.
Marty's got a nice one. They're probably the most beautiful stadium in the world, Donny Craven in Stellenbosch. I can't really think of where Tikkies would play. I mean, on the other hand, I think someone told me once there's 38 rugby fields down Lenood Road here in Pretoria. 38 or something ridiculous, man. I can't remember the number. It must be more than that. So there must be a place, I suppose. Any of the schools, office for that matter. But I mean, let's not dwell on that too much. We have to get to what's actually happening at the game. You sent me a clip, and we've been talking about NFL specifically last week a bit as well, but this week as well, learning from what the NFL can do. Probably the slowest game on earth with the biggest attendance and viewing figures. And it starts with the spectacle. Number one, when the teams run out onto the field, that little clip you showed me, I'm going to play it here as well. Make a thing of it. Make a show of it. Look at what France has been able to do at their stadiums, with making the entire stadium dark and the spotlights on the players, and when they do the half-off when New Zealand's playing there. Make a production of it. And, I know they don't have much control over this, but when you play a game at 1 o'clock in the afternoon at Ellis Park, or 3 o'clock for that matter, or Loftus, it does not have any atmosphere, no matter what tricks you pull, how many smoke bombs you have and how many planes you have flying overhead. It's deadly dull. So I suppose, like I said, let's talk about the spectacle. What do you think should they do to make the spectacle better and more entertaining? Because young people today, they want entertainment, they want the spectacle.
Yes. So I do think, first of all, it should be more like a family event. And actually, I know there are some people saying it should be shorter. I actually would argue it needs to be longer. It's a lot of effort to get in your car, go out, go with your family, find parking. I would make it longer. And I was talking to you, I can't remember my first time seeing Western Province play at the old Newlands. I think there were 3 games. There was like a school game, then a club game, and then the main game. And so I would consider at least having like 2 games. And from what I can tell about South African schools rugby, it is, as a spectacle, as an occasion, as an atmosphere, maybe the best in the world. I would consider putting like a school game, like, whatever, Office against Menlo Park,
Office
as the
grade.
pregame. As the pregame, that's number one. Number two is I am not a big fan, but I realize that I'm an old toppy. Is I'm not a big fan of like the cheerleaders and all of that. But if that works, that's fine. I think the Sharks have tried to do with that Shark Tank and stuff like that. So I think it's different on each of your locations. The culture is different, the demographic. But I would say, like for big games, no one is better than the French for the atmosphere. The way they start the game with the light show and the fireworks, it is like a Broadway production, and not in a way that feels hokey. It really is kind of compelling and spellbinding. And then, secondly, I think over time, South African fans have to learn from soccer and American college football. The clip that I sent you was not an NFL clip, was a college football clip, where over time they've established chants and things that are unique to them. The French have something where they chant, if you're not jumping, I'm covered in goosebumps right now. If you're not jumping, you're not French. And imagine Stade de France, 80,000 people in, and they start doing that, and the stadium is like rocking, like it's like a wave. It is so compelling. And I think in football, the teams have chants, unique chants, and they start singing. It's not a very South African thing to do, but we do have Shorselaza. We have some of our other things, the Mexican wave. But I would try to get the fans packed into a smaller space. I'd have a good opening
Curtain
thing,
raiser.
a curtain raiser. The college clip that I sent you is a middle of the road. It's not a top tier football school. They have one of the smallest stadiums, 65,000 seats. That's, by the way, an interesting thing that tells you for a stop-start game. The top 10 college football stadiums in the US all have seating capacity around 100,000 seats, bigger than the NFL stadiums. And they're sold out every week. But if you look at that clip, and it was something that happened 25 years ago or something, they picked Enter Sandman as their song. And that is well known. You go there and you wait for that. And when that happens, that entire stadium is rocking for 3.5 minutes, up and down. If you go to Florida, they have like a tomahawk chop thing that they do where the whole crowd do it. If you go to certain other, they have like tells that they all wave. So they have their unique thing, but it kind of builds. That's for me more important than, I don't know, the cheerleaders or whatever. But I do think you need younger people to be involved in setting that up, and then you need some high-end production values. I think sometimes when I look at the games that I've been in South Africa, the production values of what happens at halftime, it seems a little bit amateurish. I don't mean to be that negative, but it seems like it was, I don't know, like die kunstjuffrou het besluit wat om te doen. It just doesn't seem like, whereas the French thing seems like it was done by a proper producer that knew what they were doing and understand the lights, etc. And then the last thing I just say, Mbia, because you talk about the time of games, that's for me, that shows that the fan at the stadium experience for a while has not been the priority for World Rugby. And I understand why. It's because you said it's such a small portion of their actual revenue. But games get scheduled at times that make sense only because it's what works for television, not for when is the optimal time for a fan to watch a game. And I think that's the dilemma that rugby has. It's desperately in need of money, revenue. And the biggest portion of its revenue comes from television broadcasting rights. And so it's optimizing for that. That's where all the things come from about speeding the game up and things like that. It's not about the fan experience at the game or watching. It's what the broadcasters want. Mm-hmm. But that is in direct conflict with what is best for the fans. But the fans at the games don't pay enough money to sway the argument enough. And so there's this push or pull that's going on.
That's quite an interesting thing that you just said there. That the time of the game is important because they have to be able to broadcast all the games individually. So you have one at 3 o'clock, one at 5 o'clock, one at 7 o'clock, one at 9 o'clock. And the moment the game at 7 o'clock goes over time because of whatever reason, the 9 o'clock game gets affected. It either gets pushed back or the start gets missed or something. So that's one of the reasons I want to speed it up. It makes a lot of sense to me now. Suddenly, that yeah. Anyway, getting back to the speeding of the game up argument, or maybe extending it because it adds more entertainment value, it's not going to work because it's going to clash with the money, the cash cow, the TV rights, because you can't affect those broadcasts. Right? I mean, I would go to Loftus at 7 o'clock on a Saturday night rather than 1 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, but I can't because that game that I talked to you about just now. Offies were playing Grey College, I think. At the same time, the Bulls were playing Benetton at Loftus, and Loftus was empty and Offies was full. But they had no choice in the matter because TV determined the time the game was going to be played. And that comes down to the fact that TV money, is ruling the world, and that's affecting everything, the fan experience, the fan loyalty. And like I said, I think it's going to, at one stage, affect people's love for the game if they're not careful.
I think that's happening. And that is I don't want to act like we have all the answers. It is a real challenge. But I feel like it would better if World Rugby was honest about it and acknowledged it. And there was a bit of a dialogue around that, because I'm with you. Is if I'm watching a game at 1 o'clock in the day, which is not the right time, and the stadium is only 20% full, it is killing the actual goose that is laying the golden egg, which is the fan that wants to watch. Right, then it doesn't matter if I'm going to the stadium or not. It's just not an enticing product. And if I week after week watch games that are being played to stadiums that are 20% full, first of all, how hard is it for me to be excited about it if I'm not a hardcore fan? And how hard is it for me to convince my child to watch that game with me when they can go and watch Virginia Tech, which is a middle of the pack football team in America, play, and it is like a freaking rock concert, and not in a fake way because they're playing Sweet Caroline to 15,000 people, because the stadium is packed, 65,000 people, and it is rocking. And they would much rather watch that or say to me, let's go to that game than go to a rugby game.
Yeah.
And I'd say one other thing there, Envia, is because I was thinking, like, why is it that rugby is on this speed up, and yet American football, which is stop, start, they never talk about that. They never talk about speeding up the game. And the one is clearly much more financially successful and more popular and more TV deals. Why is it? And it just struck me as we were preparing for this show. The thing with it is, with American football, the TV deals are not in conflict with the stadium experience, because American football is built for stop start. And so it gives TV broadcasters ample time to put ads during the game. So they don't actually care if the games are running long or not, because they're making their money from all those stops and putting ads in there. And rugby doesn't have that. And so rugby has to get to halftime so that you can have the ads at halftime. And it has to get to the end of the game so that you can have before switching over to the others. And I don't know if you saw, there's this big brouhaha on social media about, in the UK, for the first time, ads being shown in game on a free-to-air broadcast. And I was perplexed by that initially, but then when I went and actually watched how the ads are, I could see why the fans are in such uproar. Did you see that?
No, I haven't seen it, but I heard it was quite. We used it in South Africa here, but they do it quite well. I mean, it's sort of an overlay. The game doesn't get taken away; just gets shrunk a little bit, to the corner, and you still hear the sound. Apparently, they take away the sound and everything.
Yeah, so I mean, there are two things at conflict, and it shows you how complicated it is. Fans are complaining in the UK or in Europe that they have to sign up with like multiple stream providers to see all the games. Like if you want to see the Six Nations, it's here. And if you want to see the Autumn tours, it's here. And if you want to see club rugby, it's here. And so you have to sign up for 3 to see all the games. So ITV and BBC are the providers that have had the Six Nations for free. It's free to air. You don't pay like a monthly subscription. But that's been at risk, and there has been a high possibility that the Six Nations would move to a subscription model. But ITV have kept it as a free to thing, but they've started to put ads in the game. Now, initially, when I saw everyone, including like Tim Cocker from Egg Chasers, it was for me a very like balanced, but he said, I hate this. And I thought, this is a case where the fans they're being too nitpicky. They should say, hey, we're happy that we don't have to pay for this service, that it's free. And how bad can it be to see like a 30-second ad in the game? But then I went and watched it, and it's horrible. It's horrible. They cut the screen in half. It's in the setup of the scrum. They mute the audio on the game. And then they have like an ad, which is just like out of character with the game. If it was like a game, an ad still that said, I'm selling cake because front rows don't eat salad or something, you'd at least, it's just like an annoyance. And I just thought that's an example. I understand why rugby has to do the ad, or why the broadcaster has to do the ad, but it's just done so heavy-handed, so without thinking of how it affects the dynamic of the game. And you're right, the way South African TV does it, where they put like a bar on the right and at the bottom, and they don't turn the sound of the game off, is so much better. But I did kind of figure out in my head, why is it that in the NFL no one complains? Because the broadcasters don't care, because they get lots of spots to put their ads. And so there's much less conflict. And for years and years, the fans have been conditioned to accept that start-stop nature. If you go to a stadium, it's much worse than on TV, because when the ad break is on, everyone is just standing around. They're waiting for it to return back from the ad break. And the game doesn't actually start until the TV producer or director signals to the referees that the ad break is over. That's how extreme it is, driven by the ad thing. But it works. And then the last thing I'd say, the attendance for the 32 teams in the NFL over the last few years, their stadiums are almost all bigger than our stadiums. For all 32 teams is 97% average attendance. So it's sold out every week for every type of thing. So I just don't ever want to hear again, we need to speed up the game because that's what fans are demanding. It's not. Television is demanding that.
The thing that stood out there for me is not the fact that they're doing it, it's how they're doing it. You mentioned it being heavy-handed. And that applies to TV, but also applies to the in-stadium experience. And yes, I can get to my Sweet Caroline now. I don't mind Sweet Caroline. It's sort of a running joke in our little WhatsApp group there. The point that I'm making is they're artificially trying to infuse some sort of sense of excitement or whatever. That's the first thing. Number two, you mentioned you watched the Baltimore the game in Chicago between Ireland and the All Blacks, where the DJ didn't understand rugby and he didn't know what to do when. And to me, Loftus's DJ also doesn't understand rugby. For example, in the final against Glasgow, he was playing Sweet Caroline when there was a line-out going a minute before the end of the game. Everything, the entire season was hinging on this line-out. But let's listen to Sweet Caroline. I mean, if you want to do something, do it properly. Plan it. Get somebody who understands the nuances of the game. That, to me, whether it's TV or the in-stadium experience, that is important. You have to be in touch with what makes rugby rugby. Otherwise, you're killing it.
I agree. And I think not just in touch with rugby, but in touch with the fans, both the history and the soul of rugby and the fans. And so I'm going to segue to Baltimore, because we've had a lot of questions about Baltimore, and there's a lot of pros and cons. And I would say Baltimore is a classic example of the conflict between what is good from a financial perspective versus what is good from a fan perspective. And financially, there is no doubt in my mind that for both the New Zealand and South Africa rugby unions, having the game in the US makes a lot of financial sense. The stadium in Baltimore is 71,000 seats. That's 10,000 seats more than the stadium in Chicago where Ireland played New Zealand a year ago. I think there's a good chance it will be sold out. The Chicago game was sold out. The ticket prices will be a lot higher. From a South African rugby union perspective, a lot more rands. But for the people in America, it will not feel disproportionately expensive, if that makes sense. So the average ticket price for the game in Baltimore, I think, is going to be between $150 to $200. It's my current estimate. The high-end tickets are going to be over $500. But for the average American person that's going to go, that will feel like still reasonable. But if you look at what it's going to mean from the gate receipts and the television and sponsorship stuff, I think there's a chance that that single game, if it does sell out, will make more money for the two unions than the other three games. So financially, it just makes a lot of sense. But from a fan perspective, first of all, for the South African fans, I really understand it. It's the first time since 1996 where there's one of these tours. And the final game that could be the decider of who wins the series is not even in South Africa. That seems like it just seems like that seems like a very weird thing to do. It's like saying we're going to play all of Wimbledon at Wimbledon except the final. We'll play that in New Zealand, or we'll play that in America. It's that kind of thing, which is hard as a fan from South Africa to kind of fathom, but financially I understand it. But then what I'd say, Mbia, is the risk of that game is what will the experience be? The main people that are going to go are going to be expats, South African and New Zealand expats. But if you asked Harry about the game in Chicago, he was at the game, and I kind of went back and forth on WhatsApp because I read a lot of stuff. The best way the atmosphere could have been described would have been bland or a little bit meh. And it's just because it doesn't feel like if you go to Loftus, you get all those braais before the stadium and the tailgating and whatever. None of that was there in Chicago. So that's number one. Then you get inside the stadium. The New Zealand fans are quiet by nature in any case. And then the announcer doesn't know rugby and doesn't even know all the player names, doesn't have a sense for the rhythm of the game. They can't put replays on the big screen, you told me, because they had a rights issue. There are still the American football markings on the field. They've been kind of washed off a little bit, but you feel like you're not on like a real rugby field. You're like on an American football field, and the DJ has no idea of rugby or the rhythm of rugby. And so you put all of that together. I will just tell you, like, I will be in South Africa at that time. Otherwise, I would have 100% have gone to that time. And my son will definitely go to that game. And it will be enjoyable, but it will not have the atmosphere. Most likely will be sold out if that test was played at DHL Stadium. And the risk is there are two reasons why World Rugby or the Springboks would say they're doing it. The one is just money, short-term money. That I understand. The second one is we're trying to break into the biggest market available to rugby to grow the game, which is the US market. But I would argue that game will make no difference to whether the game in the US grows or not. And potentially the World Cup in 2031, it's being done as a precursor to the 2031 World Cup to try to generate interest. But if you have one big game like that in America, and then the next week there's nothing on television, there are no rugby games, and if you went to a club rugby game in America, there's 3,000 people at it, that's not the way to build a long-term successful thing. So I think it's a bit of a myth. It's the short-term revenue impact that it has. It's short-term money, and you're sacrificing fan experience to get that short-term money. I would just say many people have said, how will Baltimore be? I've been in Baltimore. I've been in that area around the stadium. It is not crime infested like some people are implying. It's a quite nice downtown area. It's in an area which is in a corridor, a very populated corridor of Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, New York, that can easily get to that area. and it's much cheaper than that area. And what I've read is that Baltimore are competing for a stadium in the World Cup, like to be one of the host cities. And so they most likely gave a sweetheart deal to New Zealand and South Africa so that they can prove that they have the capacity to host that. I think it's not an iconic city. It's not San Francisco or New York or anything like that. It's a nice area. People that go there, I think, will have a good time. But unless they've learned their lesson from the Chicago event, the experience will be a little bit bland, in my opinion.
Right. You mentioned the word experience, and you and I started talking about, we're going to approach this. One of the things you mentioned to me is the customer experience, and one of your last jobs was being the chief customer officer. That's a term I've never heard before. But thinking about it makes such a lot of sense, not just at Springbok level. Every stadium, every franchise should have a chief customer officer. Let's call it that, because it's not just about what's happening on the field, like you mentioned earlier. It's like when you go to the toilet, for example. If you want to go buy a beer, the key word here is experience. Someone needs to sit down and understand what's happening. Do we play Sweet Caroline when there's a line out? How do we time bathroom breaks? How do we manage crowds better? It's always how do we manage crime, for example? I know for a fact there's crime inside the stadiums while games are being played. People's cell phones are being snatched. I know it's a problem getting parking. Even at Loftus, it's now a problem getting parking because the car guards will literally climb into your car, for example. So tell me the idea behind the chief customer officer, what it means and what you felt that you experienced it to be.
I'm a big believer in that, Envia, because I feel like you need someone in the morning to wake up and their primary thing that they're thinking about is the fan experience. Because it's okay to say, oh, it will get taken care of, but it doesn't. Like the Chicago one is a good example. No one thought, like everyone was thinking, let's sign the deal. We're going to make so much money. And then no one thought, who will think about like what the end-to-end experience will be. And so this comes from business. I'd say in America, at least 15, 20 years ago, no organizations had a role that was called chief customer officer. It would all be like the chief financial officer, the head of sales, head of marketing, head of products, those kind of things. But if you think of those are kind of siloed things. Each one has their own set of metrics that are driving them. I have to sell as much. I have to reduce bugs. I have to get as many web impressions. But no one's thinking end to end, what is the customer experience dealing with us? The masters of that in the past have been Apple. Apple is kind of the world leader in my organization. I had titles from head of R&D, head of products. I was president of a business unit. But in my last step, my job was chief customer officer, and mine was to work across all those silos and look at the customer experience end to end, and both short-term and long-term optimize for that experience. Now, at the time when I had that job, only about 10% of big corporations in America had that role or something with that kind of title. Now it's over 50%. I'd be fair to say I would venture half of those roles are fake roles. There are companies that are paying lip service to customer service and has good to put it on your website and say the customer comes first. But you can always tell if a company is really serious about the customer coming first or the customer is like an annoyance and we're just trying to get as much money from them. For rugby, so now to segue to rugby, boy, I think it would be an awesome thing. Either at the provincial union level, but I would actually do it at like South African rugby or even world rugby. And I'd look at all the aspects, like right at the beginning of the call, you asked me what's incorporated in customer experience. And I said, there's game day experience, there's television experience, and there's in-between experience. So let's touch on those. If you had a person thinking about this, you would have someone at the table arguing when World Rugby or South African Rugby decides that for digital media people, they're going to really make their life extra hard by, like, you know that, Tim from Egg Chasers know that, Squidge Rugby knows that if you put a clip in one of these episodes that you do, that there's a chance that you're going to get a copyright violation or in some cases, get a cease and desist letter from the rugby union, because they're not thinking about this is a way to grow the game to engage our fans. They're just thinking, hey, we have to keep our TV rights holders happy. So there's an example of a chief customer officer, let's call it a chief fan officer for rugby, would be at the table saying, no, we should encourage these digital media people to use clips, to interview players, to ask questions that we never do in our sanitized TV broadcasts, which will help engage fans and create engagement. By the way, what else creates engagement? I'm just going to segue, is characters. Like Henry Pollock drives me nuts as an old toppy, but people like him are what drive engagement with new fans, and we should accept that. As Sia did more for attracting new fans to rugby than most likely any other player in the history of rugby. We need characters that have social media presence and stuff to bring. But rugby should encourage people like you and Tim from Egg Chasers, et cetera, to engage and talk about games and show clips and generate interest between the games. The financial people will never do that. The accountants will never do that. The accountants will never think that you should have a section which is alcohol-free in a stadium. Why would you do that? Well, number one, someone with children will maybe be more likely to go to the game if they don't have to sit between fans that are massively drunk the whole time. Like for me, I actually don't mind people drinking alcohol, but you know what annoys me? Sweet Caroline annoys you at games. What annoys me at games, that I have to get up out of my seat 100 times while the game is going on to let people walk back in front with me because they have to buy beer while the game is going on. And then because they're drinking so much beer, they have to go to the bathroom 3 times. Now, I just want to be clear. I'm fine with people drinking beer, but if I could, I'd sit in a stadium where they're in a part of the stadium where they're not there, not because I care if they're drinking beer, because I just don't want them to be walking up and down in front of me. It disturbs the rhythm of the game for me. But I've heard many fans say, I would prefer, and in Wales, they have a non-alcohol section of the stand. So like if you're going with your children and you want to sit there, so someone has to think about that. Someone has to think about how difficult it is to get parking and how you get from the parking to the stadium, and how at 11 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night when the game is over, you get back there. By the way, you asked me, why is DHL or the Stormers one different? Because if you've never gone there, it's relatively easy to get parking. You feel super safe walking. It's a beautiful beachfront area that you're walking there. At night, after the game, I've done that for all the Springbok tests recently. I would walk from there to the waterfront and go and have dinner afterwards. I'd feel completely safe. There'd be other people walking. The stadium is beautiful. The bathrooms are a completely different experience than Loftus and Ellis Park. Not just the men's bathroom, but the female bathrooms. They're big, they're clean, they're almost never aligned. There's toilet paper inside. There are multiple people cleaning it all the time. I know that seems like a silly thing, but if you go to a game with your 2 young daughters and they can't go to the bathroom because there's a line like a mile long and it's dirty inside and there's no toilet paper and stuff, that's just, you go, ugh, ugh. And so someone has to think about that. And it's clear for me that different unions are thinking it at different levels, and that no one is accountable for trying to optimize that end to end. The chief customer officer, the chief fan officer would do the things like advocate for playing in smaller stadiums, would advocate for let's close the upper decks of the stands and get it looking better on television, all those kind of things. And I think with a bunch of little things, the experience can feel markedly different. And then over time, it's, even if you just attract 5% more people to the stadium, then the next time it already looks a little bit better, and then it's easier to attract another 5%. You have to start somewhere. But right now, I feel like we're gradually testing the limit of what our loyal and passionate fans are willing to deal with to see the game that they love. And at some point, that will bite you in the butt. I didn't know if I could say the American word for butt. I
Yeah,
wanted
it's
to.
fine.
It's such a
You
cool
use that
word.
word. That's a good word. Let's leave it there. I had to edit some words out from last week's podcast as well, remember? Not because we were swearing, but because we were worried that YouTube's algorithm might not be happy with what we were saying. But I'm not going to repeat it here because then I defeat the object of the exercise. Paul, I think we had a bit of a rant now, which is what we don't really have all the solutions. I mean, there are so many answers and so many questions, I suppose. But I think if somebody sits down and pays attention, we've now refocused on actually playing rugby better, which has made a difference. Now let's get the fans to go along on this journey. Now talking about fans and journey, just to close off with, you've got something interesting coming up. Where are you off to next? Seeing that you're flying around the world to attend sporting matches.
I like to surprise you always, Envia. And so I feel like my wife and I are starting to plan trips just so that we can kind of surprise you where we're going next. So we are on our way. We will leave on Wednesday for India. And our first stop in India is, I struggle to pronounce the city, Ahmedabad.
Ahmedabad.
Ahmedabad. And the reason we're going there is because I am 10 times bigger rugby fan than a cricket fan, but it is the T20 World Cup cricket in India right now. And South Africa have just qualified for the Super 8 round. And the first game, so when we decided to go to India, we didn't know it would work out this way. But the first game in Ahmedabad on the 22nd will be between South Africa and India. It's the holy grail of in India, in my mind, watching cricket. I don't know if you can remember when we just returned to international cricket, like, I don't know, 9 million years ago, it feels like.
1992.
The first game was played in Eden Gardens, I think.
I remember Eden Gardens.
It was a stadium of like 100,000, and it was just packed and had these big barbed wire fences in front of it, etc. And I always thought that would be cool. The Indians are crazy about their cricket. And so the stadium that we're going to, the Narendra Modi Stadium, is the biggest cricket stadium, and I think maybe the biggest stadium in the world, 123,000 seating capacity. And I think it will be sold out. And so we're going to India for the World Cup to watch a little bit. We're at least going to try to see the 3 Super 8 games involving South Africa. So it should be South Africa versus India versus the West Indies. And if Australia make it out of the pool stages, Australia. And then if South Africa make it through into the semifinals, it may be like in Paris where we just decide to stay on and watch till they lose. I don't know for sure. So that's where we're going to be.
They're not going to lose this
and
time.
talking about fan experience, I would say I expect the fan experience at the stadium is going to be awesome. Like, how can it not be with 123,000? But buying tickets for the game has been the most horrific fan experience I've ever had. It's an example of there being a disconnect. On the official site, I could not get it to take my credit card. And when I bought from a secondary site, it asked for an Indian phone number. So I had to have an Indian phone number to be able to receive the ticket on my phone. So in the end, I had to buy through a third-party thing at a much inflated basis to get paper tickets. And honestly, as we leave for India, I have no idea if I actually will have tickets and whether they'll be valid at the gate.
Yeah,
it really that kind of tests a fan. And I wish, Envia, that you were able to just tell me where the South African team are staying and which hotel, like you did with the Springboks, so that I could pick their hotel. But that's where we're going to be. And I'm hoping I will at least send you a video clip if my tickets actually work from this 123,000 stadium with India, South Africa.
That's the ultimate test of the fan experience. We can compare that to whatever we're experiencing over here. I mean, 123,000 is a lot of people just to manage, logistically getting them into the stadium and out of the stadium and under control while they're in the stadium. And yeah, that's something else to look forward to. Anyway, Paul, that was a nice, long, interesting discussion as always. So we'll be in touch again while you're in India. So I'm looking forward to that. So next week we'll, like I said, talk to you from India.
Okay, Envia, thanks a lot. And yes, I talked to you from India.